Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I am your co-host JP, John Plasma, the two-man power trip of wrestling. Of course, joining me is the pro wrestling financial genius himself, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
Well, we passed April Fool's Day. We passed Easter. We just experienced an earthquake. By the time you hear this, depending on how you're listening, we might have had a solar eclipse already. So, a lot going on.
Crazy. What is this? Like the world coming to an end, or what's going on here? There's too much going on right now. It's crazy. This earthquake in New Jersey and New York. What is going on? Weird.
Yeah, and I barely survived Raw in Brooklyn. It really wore me out.
Really? So you didn't have great seats, or what was going on there, or was it
Right.
a tough sell because that was the highest grossing Raw ever, right?
Yeah, so that might be part of my complaining, although I don't often think about the price if I enjoy the show. But I bought a Ticketmaster resale ticket once I heard The Rock was going to be there. I don't know what the original price was, but it was over $100. Um, this was the worst seat in the house. I have to look more carefully. I mean, I easily could have, but I just figured like sometimes when you go to a concert, they're like limited view seating, and it's awesome because you're kind of on top of the stage and whatever. But of course, with Raw and SmackDown, things like that, the limited view is that you're near the curtaining. So super steep up to the top. I've been to the venue several times before. I remember there was WWE pay per view. The Shield was on it, and Ryback and CM Punk. What was that, like about 10 years ago? That was, I had a
Yep.
great time. Not a very good seat either. Not an expensive seat, but it was a good seat. Here, like I almost tripped just like walking. I know I almost tripped walking up to my seat, and the guy next to me wasn't a small man, so he was like sort of in my chair as well because the seats were so close together. He had to actually get up and stand because it was just uncomfortable for him. So it felt really far away. I was glad I was there for like, especially the segments with The Rock because it's a special thing. Although he'll be associated with WWE for quite a while, you don't know when it's running this hot. And he was definitely over, definitely the baby face. He turned the fans a little bit, but just not a great experience at the Barclays. So maybe have to speak to the AEW executive that's now that's now working there.
It is pretty crazy, just the amount of money and the amount of people that are in the just basically in WWE right now. Well, they're so hot. It's absolutely crazy what's going on with WWE right now. But I just was shocked. It's like, wow, the most money ever. I know the Biden inflation, all the other stuff is going on, but just like, wow, that they're like that hot that they're selling out 13 or 14 shows in a row. I think it's going to be maybe 15 in a row. They're making as much money as they've ever made ever. Pretty crazy time in the wrestling business.
Yeah, it was a really smart way to price tickets, and I had heard that they put like $600 tickets on sale that day, and I think those were gone too. So smart way to make money, and it is interesting. With as we're recording this on Friday, the SmackDown show, as the last time I checked, still had 700 tickets left. So that would be like ironic if they don't sell out, when everyone's in town for WrestleMania. But obviously they'll do very well. It just might be that since there's so much going on that people have other commitments or they might not be coming into town till later or something like that.
So, would like, were you happy with the show itself? Though, were you happy with where WWE is right now creatively?
I with the show, it's hard. I'd probably have to watch it on DVR because I could have watched the screen for the matches. But in terms of the creative, yeah, it's as hot as it can get, and there's so many different potential permutations. Of course, probably, I guess Cody will finish his story, or Reigns will retain, or somehow The Rock will come out of it with the belt. Or right, doesn't somebody still have a Money in the Bank briefcase? I think that's very unlikely, right? But there's so many ways they can go, and then of course people are talking about maybe Cody and um, The Rock at SummerSlam. And of course, eventually The Rock and Reigns will have more conflict. Maybe Heyman will end up going with The Rock. So there's a lot of, when you're running that hot and you have so many top stars that are over, there's so many permutations that could keep things going.
Now, as far as WWE, obviously they're taking over the world right now. They're dominating. WrestleMania is coming up. It's going to be so hot. But let's change gears, talk about AEW, because it seems like they're letting talents work elsewhere.
Yeah, so it's a natural progression of things, citing talent, although, you know, Shahid Khan, I think, was 170 on the list of wealthiest billionaires according to Forbes. But there is some accountability, and they're not just going to hold everyone. I think the issue that people took, and maybe it just needs some more clarification, but Anthony Henry was cut because he got hurt on an independent show, and Khan said that he's welcome back when he's cleared, and allowing him to work on independent show is a challenging gray area. So I think that's something that they definitely have to work on. I know we've talked about the new executives that they were hiring in HR, so that's something to think about, right? Everyone likes when talents can go elsewhere, sort of to ply their trade, and makes it a cool thing for whatever local or semi-national promotions that you support. But if they're going to let people, if they're under contract and they let people go work elsewhere, you have to protect them as well. Or you have to consider them true independent contractors. So, schedule them for a certain amount of dates, but they can go to other places as well that are your competitors. Or, to have that agency type of booking where it has to go through the company. So some of these things people wouldn't like, but the result now of somebody that's under contract to you, you allow them to do independent shows and they get hurt, and then treat them like it's their fault, even though you like them. It just doesn't seem like a good outcome.
When you look at that too, they said they weren't going to make those cuts, and he did make cuts. He made 10 cuts. Do you put anything into him kind of going back and saying that he's not going to make those cuts, and now he does make them?
I guess sort of like thinking about what his intentions were at the time, not to make excuses, but of course, running any pro wrestling company, you know that eventually someone's time will come to an end, or it's time to switch things up. So people have to be let go on a semi-regular basis. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe the intention was to state that it wasn't with the ruthlessness that WWE does sometimes. What is it, like the week after WrestleMania, that there's like a ton of cuts every year, and those sorts of things. And or sometimes people get frustrated and they're just on a low contract for a long time, and then they can't get out there elsewhere. So there's a balance of the two. If he's, if that's what he meant originally, then he could be held to that. But I think, like, just to think about it a little bit, it would just be an impossible thing. So you have to let people go. But in terms of a permutation like this, it seems like you need a better policy. And then also, like, sometimes it's hard for Khan to win because sometimes people get mad when he doesn't say much. And then he was saying that the boys were cut because they didn't show up to some Ring of Honor shows. And it's sort of like, you've already let them go from their jobs. Why, like, publicly shame them more, right? But some people want more information. So it's a difficult balance.
Yeah, it's one of those things. And then Punk made that comment about him not running it like a business, and all of a sudden 10 guys get cut to make it. And obviously, who knows if one thing had to do with the other, but it's just funny coincidence that he said that, and then all of a sudden he cut those 10 guys. So people were making that leap saying, wow, Punk said that, and then he made those cuts. I don't think one had to do with the other, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, Tony Khan gets very emotional about these things and feels attacked. I mean, he comes from, right, the message board era, and
Yeah, yep, big time.
we have no idea what his personal life is like, but he's all in on these, like, basically hobbies, right? I know he's a hard worker. I'm not shaming that, but he's basically all in his life that we know about in terms of hobbies, whether it's wrestling or soccer or tech, whatever it may be. And then you get, like, very emotional about it. I'm not saying he's doing a bad job, but sometimes you need, like, perspective. Like we've talked about, John, like, if we like one wrestling company over another, we're not, like, it's not going to be like our lives, because we're family men. You have obligations. to earn a living. Like it sort of balances things out than when we're 11 necessarily and like wanting to argue with someone about like who's the greatest champion of all time. Although it's fun sometimes, like especially in sports, to get into that, but like not that it
Oh, yeah.
overwhelms things.
So they cut Stu Grayson for the second time, Dasha Curet, Anthony Henry, who you mentioned, Gravity, Jose the assistant, Slim J, Jora Joel, the boys who you mentioned as well, who are the Tay twins, and then Parker Bordeaux, who is actually ending up in AAA right now. So those are the cuts, and wonder if there's going to be more. Have you heard anything about maybe some more cuts for AEW?
I haven't heard more, but it would make more sense. It seems like a bloated roster. Um, I guess Ring of Honor will just keep going the way it's going. Their attendance at WrestleMania weekend doesn't seem bad, 2,500, but it's not the big numbers that used to be on the board. But it's just sort of existing in Honor Club, which sometimes it's highlighted that that's going well, or it's the highest number of signups and so on. But it just doesn't seem like that they need so much talent, on the roster. So I'd imagine that they cut back a bit, but I haven't heard anything about that. But in terms of those who were cut, like I think for Parker, it's interesting because before he signed with WWE, there was, he had, I think, connected to like Paul Heyman and also Monet, and like he was on their Instagrams and it was like, who is this like monster? And they look so cool. And then like he got a different haircut and he was rushed onto TV or whatever. And then he just didn't seem that interesting anymore. So being in AAA, about being able to work so consistently in front of big, often passionate crowds, that could be, a wonderful thing for him. And I think just like quietly to grow in the next 2 or 3 years and maybe do so in Japan later or concurrently, and then sort of start emerging back on the scene, because he didn't really have much of a foundation outside of just being rushed in NXT, and then a cup of coffee in MLW maybe, and then in AEW. He just seems like he has so much potential and people want to maximize that, but it's better to like grow and not be rushed.
Now Rousey too, right? Ronda Rousey's kind of been on the independence. You talking about guys working the independence. She's been out there more often.
Yeah, I think there was that, like, what was it, a few weekends or a couple weekends where like in a row several months ago where it's like, oh wow, she just appeared on this show in California and that show. But like obviously she's very wealthy. She's now talking about some of the issues that she had in WWE, whether somebody grabbing the drawstring of her sweatpants was by accident or on purpose or whatever. But generally, she had her issues there, and she obviously loves pro wrestling, having gone to PWG and sitting, ringside or whatever. And she seems to like that style. So that's a huge win for any company that gets her, even for one show, and whoever is able to stream it. It just puts so much attention on things. As we've talked about, there's only so many like game changer, no pun intended, type assets out there from pro wrestling, where there's names who are still relatively in their prime and can, gonna give a good accounting of themselves, and Rousey would certainly be one. Whatever you think about her pro wrestling capabilities or potential, she's a mega star. But I don't think that's, as she said, it's what she's looking for is to do independent stuff. She's not looking to work with like maybe AEW that well, they do the big stadium in London and trying to avoid the jokes about their US attendance, but obviously they're trying to do big shows. But she could just roll into town, do the type of show she likes at a super indie or even something lower profile, maybe with depending on who's on the scene and so on, with her horsewomen and other friends, and just enjoy her life. And I think that's a great place for her to be.
One comment I didn't like or didn't appreciate, I saw in one of the interviews that she did, she was making an excuse for the Holly Holm loss. Oh, I had a concussion. I hate when fighters and, and even people just sports, oh, we had an injury. It was an excuse. Like all these years later, you're coming out with that excuse of why you lost. Come on. Like, I just thought that was bad look, really bad.
So I was a big fan like of MMA like in her rise. I think by the time she had a major decline, I wasn't following as closely. But I think like with every fighter, no matter how many years later, you always like have something right you want to say
Yeah,
about it,
excuses. Oh, I should have. Yeah.
especially if you feel you're the best of all time. But I think there is something to that, like once you're knocked out once, or you've sustained some sort of major injury, it's like very hard to come back from, and like no matter who the opponents, right? Like Chuck Liddell was like unbeatable, and then like he lost a couple times, and then it's sort of like now suddenly his chin is like glass, that sort of thing. So I think there is part of it is like that physical thing, and then depending on how you're losing and so on, like there's also the mental thing, like when you felt unstoppable and you were, and then suddenly you lose, like it's very hard for some people to come back.
Now, we were talking about WrestleMania, and obviously there's so many wrestling related things going on during WrestleMania week. So you want to run that down because there was a ton going on.
Yeah, so firstly, reflecting back on episode 175 with Brett Lauderdale, on the collective and certainly Bloodsport, I think he was giving us a lot of hints. But at when he was giving it, was sort of like when he was saying that, talking to different people at WWE and on different levels. I don't want to misrepresent what he said, but go back and listen. But it was like, okay, I was not expecting Nick Khan to be a Bloodsport, let alone CM Punk and all these other people that, of course, William Regal's son on the card and so on. So that was really interesting. I'm trying to get a sense of this catering hall venue. Of course, it's small. I'm just not sure how small it is in terms of how many rows it goes back and so on. But in terms of the shows that they're doing, as of maybe a day or two before the start, and some of more shows could certainly sell out between by the time you've listened. But what was sold out well in advance was, of course, Bloodsport. I was thinking with Bloodsport, you could have even, once there was all the announcements and so on, like you could probably put it in a bigger venue, but you have this location, and maybe go with that. So Bloodsport, DDT, TJPW, and the first night of spring break and Effie's Big Gay Brunch were sold out well in advance. Those shows that hadn't been sold out as of when I checked this were Defy, GCW versus and JCW versus the World, Progress, For the Culture, and GCW versus TJPW. So for something like Progress, right, to come from the UK, although I'm assuming that they're sharing talent with Defy because they're both under the same umbrella, like not to sell out a catering hall, has to say something. But overall, the collective looks like another big success, as Brett alluded to. Also, what I always find interesting is to kind of look for some of the shows that are a little bit off the radar, just to note them. I think oftentimes people see like WrestleMania as like, this wonderful opportunity to put a spotlight on your pro wrestling work, but like Brett had mentioned, it's their biggest weekend. But sometimes it's so competitive that it could often be off the spotlight. I remember years ago when WrestleMania was in New Jersey, and there's a promotion running in like Staten Island. It was sort of like people aren't going to want to go out there, or even our friends at Catalyst Wrestling when they ran a show in like a different part of New Jersey. And from what I could tell from television at that time, that it's a pretty small attendance. So I think you have to sort of find your niche, and what's also really important is the location. People aren't going to want to go too far away from the hub of their expectations unless there's a major reason to. But just noting some of the smaller shows potentially. Superpowers of Pro Wrestling, which they're airing on YouTube. Ruthless Pro on IWTV. Attack Wrestling. Raffle Mania 5, Night 2. I guess there's a Night 1 there. YourFightSite.com. CZW, we've talked about this one at the Murphy Rec Center, so that's really interesting. It stands out. GWF Mystery Mayhem. Attack Wrestling Raffle Mania Night 1. Kaiju Big Bell. I've always wanted to go see that. They run the Bell House in Brooklyn, I think, from time to time, but that's airing on YouTube. Wrestling in the USA on IWTV. West Coast Pro on YouTube. So Dan Champion 40th Birthday Bash. I love the promotions for that show. Given Box Brown's art, and I think there's like beer also. So on the cans, art on the cans. So some things that stand out uniquely, but I think it's challenging in that way. A couple interesting articles that I found related to like the economics of WrestleMania being in town. The Rocky Shop by the Philadelphia Museum of Art is already prepared. On Monday, the staff welcomed a brand new shipment of 500 limited edition shirts in anticipation of the 40th anniversary of WrestleMania. It was from the film Rocky III, where Hogan and Stallone were fighting each other. Rocky Shop visitor experience and operations coordinator Samuel Warner said, "It's an iconic moment that Saunders loved. She's such a big fan that she even got her daughter involved in the fandom. I named my daughter after a wrestler named Natalia." Aside from local fans, the Greater Philadelphia Hotel Association expects that about 200,000 people will attend the event. Ed Gross with the association said 80% of them will be from outside the area. Last year, when the event was held at SoFi Stadium in LA, they did $215 million in economic impact. We're expecting to come at least close to that, if not surpass it. Gross also hopes fans will support attractions throughout the city, like restaurants, a Love Park, and Rocky statue. We'll come back to the economic impact in a moment, but an interesting event. Suplex Vintage Wrestling is throwing all day, all ages outdoor block party to celebrate the arrival of WrestleMania. Philadelphia is a wrestling city. It has a lot of history, a lot of prestige. We're almost obligated to give to that culture that started here. When people come to our store for the first time, their eyes light up. We pride ourselves on being a slice of wrestling heaven. For Suplex Mania, it's going to be unlike anything you've ever seen in Philadelphia. This celebration is about welcoming wrestling fans into our great city, celebrating the electrifying energy, and showcasing our collection. The full-scale wrestling ring in the middle of the street will feature live matches, wrestlers, photo opportunities, and so on. Brauhaus Schmitz will host an outdoor beer garden with beer from Stone Cold Steve Austin, as well as the People's Margarita made with Dwayne Johnson's tequila. 2300 Arena has a lot of interesting things. Arena tours with the Blue Meanie. I saw Mike Johnson also posting about giving tours, so I think that's I don't know if that was the same ticket rate that you're expecting. Oh, here's the Blue Meanie, and it's Mike Johnson. But Blue Meanie is really winning the internet for this weekend. He's all over my feed. There's a Stardom show that got a lot of attention, especially with AEW talent. Mark Hitchcock Memorial Super Show, Jeff Hardy in concert, and Battleground, who Brett Lauderdale had mentioned more than a year ago that they had basically a hold on the venue, if I remember correctly. And then there's a busted open WrestleMania party. So the Battleground Tribute to the Extreme 2 was sold out in advance. So wrapping up the WrestleMania impact, Temple Now had an article by Stephen Orbanek. A friend of mine likes to say that people who are brought in to provide these studies are very, very meticulous and very, very careful and exact in terms of the numbers they compute. But unfortunately, they put the decimal places in the wrong spot. Michael Leeds, a professor of economics at Temple University's College of Liberal Arts, whose research focuses on the economic impact of large-scale events like WrestleMania. The actual economic input is much more likely to be a small fraction of what they say. In addition to his studies in the economic impact, Leeds is an expert in sports economics, labor economics, and applied microeconomics. Maybe we should have him on the show. His research, so Here's the brief interview with him. WrestleMania is this weekend, and I've read that it's projected to have a similar economic impact to what we saw last year in LA. Is that accurate? With these studies, they will say that each person who comes to these events spends a certain amount of time in the city, and each day they spend in the city, they spend a certain amount of money. They spend this many days on average, and then they spend this much on average. The problem is that it makes no sense. Let's say you have 100 people. The Hotel Association said it was 20% local, so the professor says a third are local. Okay, so instead of them spending 1,300, which is around what each person needs to spend an average to get you from 150 to 200 million, they're now spending zero. Well, I would say that those people, even if they're local, would go to restaurants and so on. But anyway, now let's say a third of them are from the regional area, not the immediate area. So they can make it a day trip out of this. So they're not spending money in hotels. They're not having 3 meals per day. Then perhaps we can say that a third of them, which is probably being generous, are coming from out of town to spend money. There is still an economic impact, but you can see that's wildly exaggerating. Earning the right to host an event like WrestleMania is no small feat for a city like Philadelphia, as it required that the city bid for the event. Knowing that, how does it play into the economic impact of all this? In one of my sports economics classes, I just finished a session on something called the winner's curse. And the idea being that this is when you auction off something of uncertain value, the winning bid is generally greater than the value being auctioned. I've done experiments with this in my sports class, where I'll bring in a jar full of paper clips. They're very carefully counted, and I'll have a department administrator testify and write out the total of how many paper clips are in the jar. And say I'm going to auction this off, and I'll give the winner a nickel for every paper clip in the jar. Almost invariably, the winning bid is for more money than they'll get back from me. There is something that happens with oil leases in the Gulf of Mexico. It's something that happens with free agents in sports, and something that happens with cities that are bidding to host a sports team or major event like WrestleMania. What about the tourism factor? Even if the economic impact of WrestleMania is not as large as it's touted to be, it's good to bring some new folks to Philadelphia. There is some economic impact for folks coming here from out of town, but one of the things with tourism is word of mouth. People who come here are going to go home, and when they go home, they're going to talk about this one-time event. They're not going to talk about the Liberty Bell. They're not going to talk about the Philadelphia Zoo. They're not going to talk about Longwood Gardens, and those are the things that are going to draw someone here consistently. So that's the downside here. Yes, there's a boost, albeit an exaggerated one. However, it's going to have legs and it's not going to have a lasting impact. Wow.
But I do think that people are going to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner in town. So you know what I mean? Like they're going to be those other places are going to be making money. There's going to be a financial impact for sure, and they're going to spend money and they're going to buy merch and they're going to do tourist stuff. I feel like I know it won't be a long lasting. It'll just be for the week, but for that week, the town's going to be booming.
Yeah, and I think most people are coming from out of town.
Yeah.
I think he was kind of dim on that. Maybe thinking about like overall events, but something like WrestleMania, most people come from out of town. Maybe a higher percentage, let's say, from the East Coast than the West or Midwest. But I think just a ton of people travel in.
So as far as WrestleMania, I feel like we've covered a lot for Mania here, but what about Triller? What about Triller TV? What's the latest on them?
So something that we didn't have a chance to cover as much last week, although we mentioned it with Brett Lauderdale, that AEW Dynasty will be available for purchase on Triller TV. So this is generally it's a pretty big thing because AEW has had the relationship with Triller or Fight Plus or Fight, people more familiar with overseas, but they had been distributed just by Bleacher Report or your similar service. So here you get to have this tentpole event on Triller, and it could help maybe rise the other ships, right? Rising waters raise the other ships of like a GCW and anyone else distributing there. However, I think this is also available on YouTube TV, maybe more to be announced, so it's not exclusive. Something to think about with Triller, and this is from the Zone. Matchroom Boxing is the operating company for Matchroom's USA boxing business. Matchroom Boxing Limited is an intermediate holding company. DAZN has a 40% interest in the subsidiary and discloses summary information for its filing. So John Nash said, looking at Matchroom USA suggests to me it's only partly shows USA business with majority hidden in the LC. So Matchroom revenues are likely higher, but margins lower than reported for all their boxing entities combined. So all of this, what does this all mean for pro wrestling? Meaning to say that sometimes with a streaming company, it doesn't have to be, all rights. If an organization is making a big investment in, streaming deals, they might set up a way to get revenue, whether it's direct, percentage of revenue, whether it's directly through an agreement or maybe some sort of LLC intermediary. So that's all just to say that, with these well-funded streaming platforms, there's some different and creative ways to approach it when negotiating for rights.
What is going on as far as the NWA is concerned? Because it seems like NWA is going Philly as well. Obviously not now, but over the summer they're going to be going to Philly.
Yeah, I think some people are going to have to recover before returning.
Yeah, give them a few months. Yep.
So August 31st, they're coming back to the 2300 Arena for their 76th anniversary. So kind of like, Philadelphia 1776. Everyone always thinks about that, NWA history. At first, when I thought about NW 76 at the 2300 Arena, I was like, that's okay, whatever. But I like that they're playing off the connection. If you know your wrestling lore, 30 years after one of the most notorious events in NWA history, we're back. So with Shane Douglas throwing down the belt. So actually, John, I'm wondering what you think. Is the NWA in a better position now than it was 30 years ago, or it's still like sort of spinning its wheels?
It's a good question. I'm not really sure. It does seem like obviously they're more impactful now, and they've got, albeit the app deal, but they got to deal with CW. Billy's in charge, but yeah, it's a good question. I wonder, how far along that they are. I know it's a slow process, but I wonder, if they could be further along. I mean, running ECW Arena is great, so but I just wonder where they could be or where they kind of should be with Billy at the helm.
So 30 years ago, when I think about it, it was sort of like they were trying to find their footing of relevancy. Like they lost, I don't know if losing it would be the way to describe it, but the relationship with WCW was over. It was basically a very known belt, and that was the asset. So, working with a smaller promotion in Philadelphia to have a title tournament seemed like a way to get a little bit of footing and a little bit of I guess magazine attention, maybe newsletter attention as well. So I think like whoever was in charge 30 years ago, Dennis Caroluzzo and friends and so on, maybe they'd wake up the next day and be like, okay, what's the status of the NWA? Where will it be tomorrow? Here you could wake up and you could be like, okay, the NWA is is stable. You have Billy Corgan and all of that, even though they're not necessarily growing. But I think it's like a fascinating history, like the 30-year, like post WCW. I'd love to I don't know if I should be the one to write that book, but I'd love to read a book or an oral history of that or something like that. Maybe a podcast. So NWA, it's not till August. I just took, the tickets hadn't been on sale very long. Just took a quick screenshot, and there's a few tickets sold in the front row. Interesting language with the Chicago, NWA Chicago Fire, a special territory project of NWA owner Will Patrick Corgan himself. So he owns the NWA. He has the overall promotion, but it's still being broken out that there's an NWA territory where it's using some of his regular, maybe contracted talent, depending on their status, and then some local. So I guess it's a less expensive way of doing things. But to me, I question a little bit, why don't you just do another NWA show? What's the value of having a territory, unless you just loved the NWA territories and you want to keep that going, which I think it might not be too far from the case. May 18th, of course, they have the Crockett Cup. One or two rows maybe sold for that so far. You could see like some later rows completely like empty, so I'm assuming those weren't on sale yet. And It Will Never Die. EC3 announces new Control Your Narrative Essentials training course, and NWA retweeted it saying control your narrative. So if I was the NWA, I'd like to get away from that as much as possible, even if you want to highlight EC3, but it seems to keep coming back to it.
Crazy. You can't get rid of control your narrative. What is going on in the world of MLW as they head down to Tampa?
So Scott Fishman, of course, tweet out a picture of St. Pete Coliseum. I love like the old school look of it, like the big ceiling type of look, kind of like an armory look. I don't think they were using the maximum amount of space. Unfortunately, got ahead of me in order to like do a screenshot or capture the ticket sales, but it looked like a nice sized crowd, and I think a good venue for them. And they returned to Tampa Bay on July 12th, so for Blood and Thunder. I think Florida's a good match for them. So again, May 11th in Chicago. That's for the Azteca Lucha. June 1st in Atlanta at Center Stage, and July 12th in Tampa at the Coliseum.
What is up with Sukeban, obviously the Joshi promotion? What's going on with them?
So I still see the same, not exactly the same, but the same type of articles floating around like in non-pro wrestling spaces, like about who's doing the nails and the hairdresser and the fashions and so on. And a strength of theirs, of course, is that one of the owners is in PR. But basically the most notable thing is that they plan to be in LA in May. Sometimes I think, oh, okay, are they going to do more shows? But they'll be in LA in May. So let's see how they continue to grow. They signed a talent. This is just my own lack of knowledge. I'm not familiar with her, but I'm sure she's notable. They've signed Veny, Veny, and that Konami was recently released from a pro wrestling contract in Tokyo and has also signed. So I don't know enough about Joshi to know how notable those things are, but I'm sure it's helpful for them.
Now, what the heck is EDW? It seems like a weird name of a promotion. You got to tell me more about what EDW is.
Yeah,
Not
I'm a little
EDW.
I'm a little bit like afraid of saying it. I don't want to sound like inappropriate, but this is what they call themselves: Extreme Dwarfinators Wrestling, EDW. So, John, maybe we're the only podcast that's noted the recent rise of little person wrestling as it's grown on the landscape. I once invited one of the owners to come on the show who didn't respond, but there's just something about this quote sort of that absolutely amazed me from a recent article. So let me see here. Uh-oh. Actually, John, if you have that, sorry, my screen just froze up for a second.
The Dwarfinators, the unique and groundbreaking promotion that has captured the hearts and minds of audiences worldwide.
Yeah, and that part is good. But even like the beginning, I think it was sort of like that.
They embrace diversity, transformations, inclusivity. It's all at the forefront of the movement that is EDW. Yeah, interesting wording there.
Yes, so as you can imagine, pro wrestling has gotten very diverse in a number of different ways. Of course, not just starting with the diva, give divas a chance movement, but from Effie's Big Gay Brunch to people that identify across gender boundaries and so on. But it's interesting that like Extreme Dwarfinator Wrestling is like sort of taking the mantle and saying that they're the reason for all of these societal changes in the world of pro wrestling. Whereas to me, I think like, you know, talent should be given the opportunity no matter their size and stature. But traditionally, and maybe it's different, and maybe even the owners, I don't know, how many owners of little person promotions or little persons themselves. I think that's a possibility, but to me, it kind of feels exploitative still.
For sure. Very, very interesting wording there, and some of the buzzwords and catchphrases that they're using to promote the brand. But as far as some other promotions, I feel like maybe catching fire a little bit here. I know we talk about this show or this promotion almost weekly here, but what's going on with OVW's national tour?
So if they're not catching fire, they're well seasoned, sponsored by Dano's Seasoning. Uh,
Yes. Nice.
but uh, maybe it's probably too much to say second to the fairgrounds or something like that, or the auditorium, but a venue in Nashville that's fairly popular for pro wrestling. I believe Marathon Music Works, so OVW will be there. So just noting that they're keep getting out there. Something really interesting is that Mojo Raleigh, Dean Mutadi, the who's now the principal of Paragon Talent Group, um, announced that Paragon is co-owners now of Black Label Pro Wrestling. So getting involved in that, because Dean, like, he's been representing some name talent in the world of pro wrestling, and now he is or through his company, a co-owner of a notable buzzworthy independent promotion. Just some other quick hits: Action Wrestling with QT Marshall on the card drew over 700 fans to the Madras Middle School. An interesting article here. Port Moody is getting ready to rumble with its first pro wrestling show. Canadian Apex Wrestling was founded in 2023 and stages regular wrestling shows at Hastings Racetrack in Vancouver. Can a mild-mannered entrepreneur turn Port Moody into a pro wrestling mecca? Mike Arbiot is about to find out. The co-founder of the Founded Head Network, a co-working space that recently relocated to Site B in Port Moody, is transforming the former industrial warehouse turned event facility into a suburban version of the Thunderdome for the city's first pro wrestling show, Brewery Brawl. But Arbut is more than just a wannabe Vince McMahon. He's not only the president of fledgling Canadian Apex Wrestling, he also climbs into the ring as Dance Daddy De Niro. Arbut said his love for pro wrestling's legions of colorful characters developed when he was a kid. Then he did backyard wrestling. When he was in high school, they paid to book a ring. And at 19, he was being paid to be part of cards and the local circuit. In 2023, Arbut started CAW as a bit of a throwback to old school wrestling from the 80s and early 90s with larger-than-life characters and tongues firmly placed in cheeks. We're just having fun. The show and its characters, like Moondog Manson, Adonis, and CAT, Half Man, Half Cat, have found a home at the Hastings track in Vancouver. First on the infield, putting on matches between the horse races. That's pretty amazing. I thought it was interesting in the ticket booth area for dog racing, right, for ECW, but they were putting on matches at a horse racetrack in the infield. And now in the all ages portion of the casino. Pro wrestling can really go anywhere. Arbut said bringing the show to Port Moody is a natural fit, especially along the city's renowned breweries row of craft breweries. It's such a happening area. Beer and fun go hand in hand. Already the city is responding. Arbut said advanced ticket sales are stronger than the shows at Hastings. And if they continue to go well, he may bring temporary bleachers into the venue. As the event is on Cinco de Mayo, the Port Moody show will have a lucha libre flavor, with some of the combatants wearing the masks favored by pro wrestlers. It's part of their culture. It's like a religion. And an article about Excite Wrestling in upstate New York. Hornell natives, national figures enter the ring for Excite Wrestling debut. Hornell's looking to get a little rowdy. Excite Wrestling is bringing suplexes, body slams, and general mayhem to Hornell for the first time, hoping Maple City Madness at the Hornell Area Family YMCA. The independent promoter typically holds events in Binghamton and Horsehead, but was inspired to venture further west in the southern tier after a handful of Hornell area wrestlers requested a local show. They said there's a lot of people who might not be able to make the drive out to Horsehead on the regular. So what if we try doing a show in Hornell? They got this venue that would be perfect size, and we'd love to be able to wrestle in front of our friends and neighbors. Popolowski said the Hornell area wrestling climbing the ranks at Excite are Sir Rain Shell Connors and Caden Sin. The group has been running with H.C. Loke, who wrestled with ECW and ROH, and has a 9-month reign with the Excite heavyweight title. They're at the point now where they're regulars on a roster and they're going out to other promotions in the region working. It's very exciting to see this new crop of homegrown talent that we can pull from the area. Hornell fans may recognize Tommy Dreamer. If somebody knows nothing about Excite, they'll see Tommy Dreamer on the poster and be like, oh, I remember him from TV. He's a big get. Excite has also been encouraged by the excitement of the Hornell community in the days leading up to the event. Front row is already sold out. The response has been way beyond what we expected. We thought it would do well, but our pre-sale numbers are higher than they've been for many other shows. The sponsorship support from the local business community is incredible. And finally, Farmington Mayor jumps into pro wrestling ring to raise funds. So the part about this, which was amazing, especially since it's going to a charitable cause, was that 300 fans attended a show and $21,000 was raised. So I believe that's $700 that's $70 per person, but still very impressive. I'm imagining that there were some items auctioned off and so on, as opposed to just ticket and merchandise sales.
Seems like a lot of wrestling going on. Not only WrestleMania week, and like we've been talking about, but all over the place. Crazy how much wrestling is really out there, especially when you kind of bring it to the forefront on the show. How many different promotions and leagues and different people are involved or wanting to get involved or raising money involving wrestling. Just crazy how much wrestling is out there.
I think what's also interesting, of course, like if promotions weren't doing well, they wouldn't highlight it unless like there was a disaster story of how they burned out of town or something like that. But we're seeing a fair amount of things where they're like, this is the first time that wrestling has been here in this amount of time, or that they need now a bigger venue because of the demand and so on. So it's not necessarily fully indicative of what's going on in independent pro wrestling, but I am seeing a fair amount of that. So a lot of good news, and it just seems, I mean, some promoters might laugh at that, but it just seems more sustainable to try independent pro wrestling maybe than it had been in the past.
And I feel like there's different options to kind of get it out there to the public, like, hey, Triller or Fight TV, if you will. I mean, you can kind of get people to see your product easier nowadays, for sure. I mean, they can watch it on their smartphone if they wanted to.
Yeah, and given the diversity in pro wrestling, we have to we have to thank the Dwarfinator promotion for
Yes.
diversifying our industry and creating inclusiveness for all.
It is crazy to think like, hey, the like little was it micro brawlers? No, little big brawlers was like drawing some ratings on TV. So hey, you never know what's gonna hit.
Yeah, and did Hulk Hogan have like a micro wrestling promotion, or am I
Yes,
mixing up? Okay,
I believe he was a part of that too. Yeah,
I missed that era of things. The
there was some
post
weird stuff.
the post
Celebrity
boom.
Championship Wrestling too. Yeah.
Oh yes. I used to like, well, at least like that one special, right? Like on Fox, the celebrity boxing, and then they tried it again. It was more of a disaster. But you can find like
Yeah.
C-level stars like Danny Bonaducci and like boxing Corey Feldman or whomever.
When you think about some of that stuff, you're like, oh God, this is terrible. But usually the first time out, it usually draws, I guess, kind of like that freakish, people are just inquisitive kind of thing. But then the second time out, you're like, all right, man, maybe this isn't going to be a success. I don't know about this. But first time out, the curiosity factor is definitely raised with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, and I'm not proud to admit this, but I was curious at the time as a teenager. Remember bum fights?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I bought the DVD, or I guess maybe it was a VHS at the time. I was just curious, but it was just so bad that I was just like, I can't watch this.
Some of that stuff, not so great. Maybe entertaining for a minute, but then you realize like, this isn't a great thing to be watching here.
I think that people that don't watch pro wrestling, and at its worst, sometimes it is sort of like that stuff, but people that don't watch and they sort of like look down on people that do, like that's what they assume that it is. Like to them, there's like no difference between like bum fights, dwarfinator, slap fighting, bare knuckle, and pro wrestling.
Crazy. And pro wrestling gets thrown into that world, unfortunately. You know what I mean? That they always kind of get thrown in that.
And sometimes they do it to themselves, right? Like you have like, okay, here's like a lowbrow promotion, somebody who's accused of the worst things, and then you give them like the spotlight, or certainly the ownership, or fan experiences like that come out of it. Like a lot of it they've done to themselves, and sometimes there isn't depth to an angle and so on, but often there is something interesting. I think it wouldn't have survived as long without having this solid foundation. And we're going to see the peak, to circle it back, I guess, see the peak of that storytelling here, because, you know, who knows what's going to happen? Probably Cody Rhodes will finish his story, but I'm certainly curious. I don't know if I'm motivated to buy it on my traditional platform, my traditional streaming platform, cable TV, but we'll see.
That would be remarkable that you're doing that. But obviously, I'll be going to night two, but I'll be watching night one on Peacock for I think it's $5 or $6 a month. So it's not a bad deal if you can get it.
Nice. I had forgot to ask you if you're going. So is it just like WrestleMania 2 in and out, or are you experiencing any of the other elements?
Just WrestleMania, WWE World. My buddy was sending me pictures and stuff. Man, it's almost nuts. He can barely walk around in there. There's so many people at the convention center. But I'm just going to do Mania and it kind of go in and go out. But obviously, I'll be there for what 6 hours or whatever it is. I mean, I'll be there all day. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, wasn't the idea of 2 nights that like you could have it just like 3 hours and be calmer, but somehow they've managed to like make it just as long, but now just
Yes,
twice.
yes. Yeah, I think last year, counting the pre-show, was 5 hours and 5 hours. So, and then
Wow.
you add in everything else. It's the press conference and blah blah. I mean, it can go 6 hours each night. I mean, it's a lot. It's almost too much.
To me, one of the best things about pro wrestling growing up, I guess I didn't think about like it being the best thing, but that like consistency. Like if you went to a WWF house show, you do like 2 hours and 45 minutes, or in a pay per view, that was it. Like if it was going to be longer, like there would be like, okay, we have an extra hour, whatever, but like you knew consistently, this is when I get in, this is when I get out, and so on, that you could rely upon. And it wasn't until I started going to like Ring of Honor, it's sort of like, how many hours am I get? I'm enjoying this, but like, how many hours am I getting to be here? Because I took the bus trip and I'm
Yep.
kind of done. But you're like, okay, I'm committed for 3 more hours.
It's I suppose ROH shows. Ooh, they used to be long ones for sure. But let's wrap this bad boy up. Head towards the plugs. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Two Man Power Trip. Lavie, what's going on with you?
Go back to our interview with Brett Lauderdale, whether on PW Ponderings via YouTube and their website, or through Creative Control Network distribution. And episode 175, you can look for all the hints from Brett Lauderdale of what's been occurring with Bloodsport and what's ahead for that weekend. Check me out on Twitter or X, Lavie Marg, LAVIE MARG, and my prediction for our next president, or returning president, Donald Trump. So learn about his rise to power through the world of pro wrestling, through Trump mania, and every week brings more relevancy. Wanted to note the passing of Joseph Lieberman, as Jerry Lawler pronounced it once on Monday Night Raw, the night before the election. A former vice presidential candidate, but elected official for many years, and who I did not know, but who actually lived in my neighborhood. So I'd see him walking around sometimes.
Wow, damn, nice, cool. Um, Thank you, Lavie. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. See you right back here next week for a little business of